Hello, welcome. Welcome to the iconic courses event as part of the Visitas program. You're going to hear about two of Harvard's iconic courses today, Humanities 10 and, I'm kidding, I know what the other one is. It's CS50, but I'm here to represent Humanities 10. My name is David Elmer. I'm a professor in the classics department, and I'm joined by my colleague, Professor Samantha Mathern, in the philosophy department to tell you a little bit about Humanities 10, and then you will hear from our colleague, David Malin, about CS50. So, a little bit about Humanities 10, or HUM10, as we like to call it. I want to start with, Samantha and I are going to give you a kind of brief demonstration of the kind of teaching we do in this introduction to the humanities. But I want to start by giving you a brief kind of overview of the course, because HUM10 is, to an extent, a unique course at Harvard and a unique introduction to the humanities. We conceive of it, as you can see in the text on the screen here, we conceive of it as a community in conversation about works of literature, art, and philosophy that we value. Now, over the course of a year, and this is a full year course, 2 semesters long, over the course of a year we read about 23 different books representing about 2,500 years of literary history. We discuss these books intensively, and we work with you to help you craft your own writing in response to these texts. Now, writing is the most intense form of thinking. So what we aspire to do in this course is to help you engage with these works and engage in the conversation we're having as thoughtfully as possible. Writing is a big component of this course, so students who complete the full course, both semesters, fulfill the expository writing requirement in the college, and therefore don't have to take the expos course. So if you take HUM10, you don't take another expos course. In addition, HUM10 students participate in a variety of faculty-led outings to museums, concerts, cultural events, and we try as much as we can to foster this community in conversation outside the classroom and even beyond the first year of college. So we have a really active network of HUM10 alumni, the HUM alums, who organize a variety of events throughout the year. Now, I want to say a quick word about what this course is not. It is not exactly a great books course in the way such courses are often designed. The books we read are obviously great. We wouldn't ask you to read them if they weren't. But we make no claim in this course to be teaching some kind of essential set of works or works that are uniquely important. In fact, our syllabus and our reading list change every year. A few things stay the same, but most of the course is different every year. And the reading list changes every year because when we're putting together the next version of the course, we don't start from the books we want to teach. We start from the faculty that we want to bring into the classroom. We try to recruit the best professors we can from across the humanities at Harvard, and we ask them to teach books that have been particularly impactful for them, books that have been particularly critical in their own lives as readers and thinkers. Each semester there are, in fact, 6 different professors, and so students in the course hear 2 lectures from each of these 6 professors, and they participate in a semester-long seminar led by one of those 6 professors. So today you're going to hear from Professor Mathern and I miniature examples of the kinds of lectures we give in this course, but the thing we can't reproduce for you on this stage is the really intense interaction and conversation that you have outside the lectures in your seminars and writing labs. Now, I've given you a brief sketch of this course as it's conceived by the instructors. Here on the screen is a sketch of the course as it's perceived by students, or at least by one particular student who created this Venn diagram for the 15 Minutes magazine, the Harvard Crimson's weekly magazine. And this is a diagram that's meant to describe HUM10 by defining its zone of overlap with the song I'm Just Ken, as performed by Ryan Gosling. Now, Boy, I'm sure you're all laughing uproariously in the audience while I give these remarks. Okay, so anyway, I think the reporter has in this case done a pretty good job of outlining the course. I would say especially provokes profound analysis. That's head on, that's right on. There are two errors in this diagram that I think need correction. Only one, however, I will tell you, I actually requested formally a correction from 15 minutes. So one error here is this point about feeling of deep inadequacy. I mean, I can't speak to the experience of this particular student, but I promise you that most students in HUM10 report that they gain a lot of confidence in their critical analysis and writing skills in the course of the course. The bigger error here, and the one that I did request a correction of, was this idea that somehow we lack big fur coats. So as I pointed out on my Instagram shortly after this came out, we definitely do have big fur coats. Now, because I have a relatively short time left on the stage, I thought I would talk to you today for my sort of mini demonstration about a relatively short text, a lyric poem, but a poem that is no less powerful and no less extraordinary for its brevity. In fact, the poem I want to talk with you about today is one of the most astounding and remarkable lyric poems I know of, and this is the so-called Hymn to Aphrodite, attributed to the ancient Greek poet Sappho. And the poem is sometimes just called Sappho 1. The poem, as you will see, stages a kind of conversation, and it seems, therefore, like a good way to introduce this course that seeks to cultivate meaningful and enduring conversations. Now, this poem, actually we should call it a song because it was originally composed as a musical composition in antiquity. This song is one of only two more or less complete poems that have survived from the very large corpus of songs long ago attributed to Sappho, who was a great female poet from the island of Lesbos. From her large corpus, most of what survives is made up just of the tiniest scraps, sometimes just a word or two, preserved on a fragment of papyrus. This text survives in its entirety because it is quoted by a writer of the 1st century BCE named Dionysius of Halicarnassus. His writing includes this quotation. Now, Dionysius quotes the text because it was the first poem in the 9-book edition of Sappho's poetry created by scholars working in the Library of Alexandria in the 3rd century BCE. So we could say that the text survives because it was at the front of this Alexandrian edition. But there are about 4 centuries between the creation of the Alexandrian edition and the time of the song's original composition in the 7th century BCE. That is a very long time. It's the amount of time that separates us from Shakespeare. And it would have been the easiest thing in the world for this song to just completely disappear in those 4 centuries, not least because the further back we go in time, the less likely it is that writing could or would have been used to preserve this song. So if this song survived down to Alexandria, it did so because it survived in a performance tradition long enough to make it into written collections of Sappho's poetry. It survived, in other words, because when it was composed and sung, it was so compelling that it inspired other singers to learn it and to sing it, and others to learn it and sing it again, and so on, until finally it gets recorded in writing. So my question, that I want to explore in the next couple of minutes is, what gives this song its power? A power that guaranteed its re-performance and reproduction over centuries. Certainly there must have been many factors involved. I think not least the music of this song, which is lost. We have no idea what the music itself sounded like. In some ways, what is most accessible to us is the power of this text as a performance. And that's somewhat paradoxical because, of course, we don't encounter it as a performance. We encounter it as words on a page. But if we imagine a performer singing this song, then I think we can come fairly quickly to recognize how extraordinary it is. So the song is a prayer to Aphrodite, asking the goddess to come to the assistance of the speaker, Sappho. Remember, first of all, that this song would have been performed countless times by singers who were not Sappho. But in performing the song, they took on Sappho's persona. They became Sappho. Now, something I think really extraordinary happens in the course of this poem. Let me read it and see if you can imagine a sense of what's happening here. Deathless Aphrodite of the spangled mind. I'm not doing this from memory, by the way. It's on the screen in front of me, just in case you're wondering. Deathless Aphrodite of the spangled mind, child of Zeus who twists lures, I beg you, do not break with hard pains, O lady, my heart, but come here if ever before you caught my voice far off, and listening, left your father's golden house and came, yoking your car. And fine birds brought you, quick sparrows over the black earth, whipping their wings down the sky through mid-air, they arrived. But you, O blessed one, smiled in your deathless face and asked, what now again I have suffered, and why now again I am calling out, and what I want to happen most of all in my crazy heart. Whom should I persuade now again to lead you back into her love? Who, O Sappho, is wronging you? For if she flees, soon she will pursue. If she refuses gifts, rather will she give them. If she does not love, soon she will love even unwilling. Come to me now, loose me from hard care, and all my heart longs to accomplish. You be my ally. What has happened here? Did you notice? This Sappho performer asks the goddess to come here, to appear to her in the present, and justifies the request by recalling an earlier occasion when the goddess did come. We see Aphrodite in midair, and then suddenly Aphrodite arrives. Sappho describes her arrival without actually quoting the questions that Aphrodite posed on this occasion. And we have this repetition of the phrase now again, emphasizing that even this past occasion on which Aphrodite came was itself a repetition of even earlier occasions on which Sappho had asked for help. So we have a present moment of performance, a past occasion of which the present is meant to be a repetition, and other even earlier occasions of which that past occasion was a repetition. And then, just when Aphrodite, who has so far just been paraphrased by Sappho, just when Aphrodite mentions Sappho's crazy heart, that's up here, and the word in Greek suggests the kind of madness that occurs when someone is possessed by a divine entity. Just at that moment, something truly extraordinary happens here. Aphrodite suddenly begins speaking in her own voice, except that the voice is also the voice of the performer. So this performer, who had previously taken on the persona of Sappho, now takes on the persona of Aphrodite. And this is the moment when the prayer is fulfilled, the moment of Aphrodite's arrival here, the moment when she speaks. The poem, in other words, stages an epiphany. It stages an appearance of the goddess in the here and now of performance. The epiphany is also a kind of possession. The performer is possessed, first by the persona of Sappho, and then by immortal Aphrodite herself. It's hard to imagine, I think, a more eloquent demonstration of the power of poetry than this summoning into presence of an immortal god. Now, the emphasis on Aphrodite's immortality, and note this repetition of deathless in the poem, is very significant because ultimately this song is about the endless, deathless reproduction of Aphrodite and of Sappho in song. It is about the eternal reperformance of the poetry and persona of Sappho and a conversation between performers and Aphrodite that extends indefinitely into the future. Notice that Aphrodite, who has been summoned by references to a series, an infinite regression of past occasions, immediately refers to future occasions. If the girl flees, soon she will pursue. Now, it's important that Aphrodite does not say that this fleeing girl will pursue Sappho. Rather, that girl, the one who flees now, will in the future experience exactly what Sappho is experiencing now. That girl in the future will be the next performer of Sappho's prayer to Aphrodite. She will come in turn to take on the persona of Sappho and eventually to the persona of deathless Aphrodite. So Sappho 1 is fundamentally about love, and about love as a creative or recreative force. In some sense, love is always a creative force. In the end, the ultimate end of that creative force in this poem is the reproduction of the song itself, a reproduction that guarantees the immortality of Sappho and of Aphrodite. And in this way, the poem both describes and enacts in performance the power that carried the song down to Alexandria, the reproductive power, and ultimately carried the song down to us. The song also enacts a certain relation to poetry and to poetic tradition. The performer of this song calls on Sappho's Aphrodite, who we might say symbolizes the entirety of the tradition of love poetry. The performer calls on that tradition, as represented by Aphrodite, as an ally in the experience of love. And in this way, I think this poem speaks to something we can all recognize, the way in which poetry, song, literature can provide a kind of help or assistance as we navigate some of life's experiences, especially the more challenging ones. So I'll close there with saying just that the poem, I think, really speaks to a kind of a familiar mode, a familiar way in which we have all, I'm sure, from time to time, looked to poetry, music, literature, art as a form of support in difficult moments. And at this moment, I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Samantha, to continue the demonstration.
Where's your coat? Well, hello, Visitas people. I am somebody who teaches in HUM10 along with Professor Elmer, but whereas Professor Elmer is a classics professor, I am a philosophy professor, and I'm going to make you do a little philosophy with me for the next 10 or 15 minutes. One of the fields in philosophy that I specialize in is a field named aesthetics. So I want you all to just take a second and think about what comes to mind when you hear the word aesthetics. I guess now we're probably all thinking of Ken from Barbie, certainly an aesthetic specimen, but you might think of other domains of aesthetics. You might be thinking about influencers. You might think about a well-curated social media account. Perhaps you're thinking about plastic surgery. Here, you might think that aesthetics involves a kind of attentiveness to the surface of things. And you might also worry that aesthetics, in valuing the surface of things, is neglecting the substance, the soul of things. But most people who work in philosophical aesthetics think that although there are some forms of aesthetics that we should worry about, there are also forms of aesthetics that are central to the kind of experience that gives our life meaning, weight. So think about some of the things that Professor Elmer was just talking about. Love, poetry, conversation, allyship, connection. These are the heart of so many aesthetic things. If you think about the long history of the term aesthetics, it starts to be used in the context of ancient Greece, which we were just thinking about. But in the context of ancient Greece, the word aesthesis had a different connotation than it does now. Originally, aesthesis just refers to sensory perception. So think about what you are seeing right now, hearing right now, feeling right now, tasting right now, smelling right now. That's all sensory perception. And in ancient Greece, all of that would have fallen under the heading of aesthetics. And it's really in the 18th century, thanks to a German who felt the need to persify things, that we start to get the notion of aesthetics that's more in touch with how we think about aesthetics today. So for Baumgarten, though aesthetics remains connected to sensory perception, for Baumgarten, aesthetics refers to the sensory perception of particular things. It refers to the sensory perception of things that have aesthetic qualities. So think about aesthetic qualities like beauty. Think about qualities like sublimity. Think about qualities like cuteness. These are all special qualities that some but not all objects have. So for somebody like Baumgarten, when we look around the world, when we look to things in nature, when we look to art, when we look to design, we're going to find some things are aesthetic and others are not. So in the modern tradition, aesthetics comes to refer to our experience or the creation of sensory things that have these kinds of qualities. As a philosopher, it is my job to think philosophically about what exactly does the aesthetic domain involve. And there's some classic philosophical questions here that maybe some of you have already thought of before. Here's one. Is beauty in the eye of the beholder? If you think yes, then you think what's beautiful for you is going to be different from what's beautiful to other people. So maybe you find Ken in his fur coat beautiful, but one of your friends doesn't. If beauty is in the eye of the beholder, there's no fact of the matter about whether that is something that's beautiful. But you might be an objectivist about beauty. So there is a fact of the matter of how many people are in this audience right now. If you're an objectivist about beauty, you think that there's also a fact of the matter about whether things are beautiful or not, whether they're sublime or not, whether they're cute or not. And people who dissent from agreeing to whether something is beautiful or not are just mistaken, just as you might be mistaken about the number of people in this room. So that's a very classic philosophical question that you might be asking about the aesthetic domain. But I'm going to ask you to think about a different kind of philosophical question with me today. And that question is going to be a question about what I'm going to call aesthetic exploration. So what I mean by aesthetic exploration is how do you go about navigating the wide world of aesthetic value? So think about all the beautiful things, all the sublime things, all the cute things, all the fun things, all the elegant things. We can go on and on and on. How do you go about choosing what to aesthetically engage with? How do you decide how to aesthetically explore? And here, my question is not a descriptive one. I'm not just asking for you to tell me how you, in fact, go about finding, say, new music or new film. What I really want to ask is, how should aesthetic exploration go? So I'm asking a normative question, which is inviting us to think about what is the best way to pursue this wider world of aesthetic value. I'm going to give you 3 answers to the question, how should we aesthetically explore? The first answer is what I'm going to call simply the best. So you might think when you're deciding what to aesthetically engage with, you should just go in for whatever is aesthetically best. So think about at the end of every year, there are endless best of lists. There's best literature, best TV, best movies. There's also a longer tradition of what we call best of lists now, namely the great books, which Professor Elmer was referring to before. So there are some people who think that there's some list of the greatest books of all time, and that's what we should be reading. You might think of something like Penguin's Classics as trying to designate certain works of literature as the best. But you could also think about things like national parks or World Heritage Sites. These are efforts to say, look, there's a lot of aesthetic stuff going on in the world, but these are the best things that you should spend your time with. So you might think, when you're navigating the wide world of aesthetic value, go in for what's best. Here's some reasons to worry about the simply the best answer. First of all, best of lists, great books lists, don't always track aesthetic value. I hate to break it to you, but sometimes these best of lists are motivated by things like economic concerns. Sales go through the roof when a book is listed as the best. There's also all sorts of cultural biases, personal biases that can go into forming these lists. But look, when we're aesthetically exploring, if what we want to do is find what is actually beautiful, sublime, cute, etc., you want to have something that's more reliable than a biased best of list. That's one objection. Here's a second objection. Suppose the best of lists actually are tracking what is beautiful, what is sublime, what is cute, etc. Why think what somebody else designates as beautiful is going to be beautiful for you? This variance of taste between people often goes under the heading of the diversity of taste. So to get into the space of thinking about the diversity of taste, think about how different taste is at this moment from the moment that Professor Elmer was just talking about when Sappho was writing her poetry. But you don't even have to go that far. Think internal to your friend group. I imagine that many of you have aesthetic debates where you cannot believe that somebody doesn't like a song or a TV show that you like, and you're in a very close-knit community. Now, you might think when we respect the fact that there's going to be a huge diversity of taste between people, why would you ever outsource what you aesthetically explore to somebody else? Because there's no guarantee that because they liked it, you're going to like it too. So, reasons to think that simply the best answer is not going to be the best answer for how you should aesthetically explore. Here's the second answer. The second answer is an answer that I'm going to cash out in terms of the notion of resonance. To say that something aesthetically resonates with you is to say that it somehow hits home with you. It strikes a chord. So I imagine that many of you have favorites. You have favorite television shows, favorite music, favorite books, favorite outfits, favorite design schemes. You resonate with them. You might have things that you really emotionally connect to, or maybe things that your friend group really resonates with. And the resonance answer says, look, when you're trying to figure out what in the wide world of aesthetic value to explore, go for what resonates with you as an individual. I think that most people make their decisions for how to aesthetically explore on the basis of resonance. When you're playing through, or you're looking at your Spotify catalog, or you're looking at what to stream, I think we often go in for, what's going to hit home for me? Resonance is great, don't get me wrong, but there is a cost to resonance. Namely, resonance keeps you in a narrow aesthetic lane. If what you're picking aesthetically is only what resonates with you, you are only going to ever experience the same sorts of things again and again, and you're never actually going to be taken out of yourself in your aesthetic pursuit of value. So you might think that resonance encourages a kind of aesthetic narrow-mindedness, an aesthetic narcissism, if you want to go that far, that closes you off from all of these really beautiful, sublime, cute things in the world that you're missing out on because they're not going to resonate with you. So, third answer. You might organize your pursuit of aesthetic value around what I'm going to call marveling. By marveling, I have in mind this experience when you encounter something beautiful or sublime and you are taken out of yourself. You cannot believe that something that beautiful, that sublime exists out there in the world. When you marvel at something, you feel grateful, you feel wowed that that aesthetically great thing exists. You'll get this every week in HUM10, I promise you. Marveling, note, is not about you. It's not about what speaks to you as the individual that you are. Marveling is something that displaces you. It puts you into the thing, it transports you beyond yourself. Here's a confession. Every year in HUM10, we read James Joyce's Ulysses. It is not a novel that resonates with me. If I want a modernist novel that takes place over 24 hours, I'm taking Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf every single time. Nevertheless, I read Joyce's Ulysses every year, not just because it's on the syllabus, but because it's something that I marvel at. When I think of the aesthetic greatness of Ulysses, I am blown away that a novel of that caliber exists. So I invited you to explore a question with me. How should we aesthetically explore? I gave you 3 answers: simply the best, resonance, and marveling. You might expect me to now answer which way you should aesthetically explore. If philosophers actually answered questions, we would be out of a job. What I will tell you instead is that we don't necessarily have to choose between these things. Our aesthetic lives are very long. And you might think some days you're going to go in for resonance, some days you're going to go in for marveling. But in the end, wouldn't it be better to be a resonant marveler? Thanks, everyone.